In the winter of 1890, the Montana Territory's Elk Ridge was a land of whispers and shadows, where snow fell like a curtain over the towering pines and the wind sang a mournful tune through the valleys. Clara Wade, 24, stood alone in her family's log cabin, its weathered timbers creaking under the weight of a blizzard's wrath. The fire in the stone hearth cast a golden glow across the room, its crackle the only sound save for the storm's relentless howl outside. Clara's auburn hair was tied back in a loose braid, her brown eyes sharp with caution as she stirred a pot of venison stew, the savory aroma mingling with the scent of pine and smoke. Her rifle leaned against the doorframe, a silent guardian, its barrel glinting in the firelight. A year ago, a charming drifter with honeyed words had stolen her savings, leaving her heart scarred and her trust in strangers buried beneath layers of distrust. As she ladled stew into a tin bowl, a knock shattered the cabin's quiet, heavy and urgent, like a plea carved from desperation. Clara froze, her hand tightening on the ladle, her pulse quickening. The storm had cut Elk Ridge off from the world. No one should be out in this gale. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady but edged with fear, her brown eyes darting to the frosted window. "Please," came a man's reply, muffled by wind and snow, his tone raw with urgency. "I mean no harm. My boy's freezing. We need shelter just for one night." Through the window's icy pane, she glimpsed a tall silhouette, broad-shouldered and hunched, cradling a smaller forma child, trembling in the blizzard's grasp. Her heart thudded, torn between the memory of betrayal and the instinct to help. Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing the rifle stock, her breath fogging in the chilly air. "I don't open my door to strangers," she snapped, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. A pause followed, the wind shrieking like a restless spirit. "I understand," the man said, his voice lower now, heavy with desperation. "I wouldn't ask if I had a choice. My son's sick, ma'am. He's burning up, and this cold will kill him." A sharp, pained cough from the child cut through the storm, piercing Clara's resolve like a knife. Her hands shook as she unbolted the door, snow swirling in as it swung open, the cold biting her cheeks. The man stepped inside, snow-crusted boots thudding on the worn floorboards, his wool coat dripping onto the pine planks. He was about 35, tall and broad, his dark hair matted beneath a tattered wool cap, his hazel eyes weary but kind, etched with worry. In his arms, a boy of 7, pale and shivering, clung to him, his brown eyes half closed, his face flushed with fever. "Name's Thomas Reed," the man said, his voice low and grateful as he set the boy down by the hearth. "This is Sam, my son." "Thank you, ma'am." Clara nodded, her rifle still within reach, her brown eyes narrowing as she studied them. "Sit by the fire," she said, her tone clipped. "Don't touch nothing else." Thomas knelt by Sam, peeling off his soaked coat to wrap it around the boy, his hands steady despite the chill. Clara fetched a tin mug of hot broth from the pot, her movements brisk but careful, her gaze never straying far from the strangers. She handed the mug to Thomas, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Why are you out in this storm? Ain't no one for miles." Thomas met her eyes, his hazel gaze steady, though a flicker of something guilt perhaps crossed his face. "Heading to my sister's in Billings," he said, his voice rough but honest. "Wagon broken axle, then the horse spooked. Had to walk the last mile." Sam coughed again, a weak, rattling sound, and Thomas's hand tightened on the boy's shoulder, his worry plain. Clara's heart softened at Sam's frail form, but her distrust lingered, a lesson hard-learned from the drifter's charm. She stoked the fire, the flames leaping higher, casting golden shadows across the cabin's walls. Thomas warmed Sam's hands, murmuring soft words she couldn't hear, his care for the boy undeniable. Yet something about him, the way his coat hung too finely for a common traveler, stirred her uneasy. But as Clara turned to hang the ladle, a glint of gold slipped from Thomas's coat pocket, a pocket watch, engraved and far too fine for a drifter, and she wondered if the man she'd let into her home was hiding more than a broken wagon. The blizzard tore through Elk Ridge, Montana Territory. In the winter of 1890, the wind howling like a mournful spirit through the snow-laden pines. Inside Clara Wade's log cabin, the hearth's golden flames danced, casting warmth against the frost that clung to the timbers, the scent of venison stew and wood smoke filling the air. Clara, 24, stood by the kitchen table, her auburn braids swaying as she sliced cornbread, her brown eyes flickering with caution. The glint of a golden pocket watch, too fine for a drifter, had slipped from Thomas Reed's coat, stirring her distrust, but the frail cough of his son, Sam, tethered her heart to compassion. The cabin's walls creaked under the storm's assault. A fragile haven in the wilderness, Thomas, 35, knelt by the hearth, his dark hair curling slightly as it dried, his hazel eyes fixed on Sam, who lay bundled in a patched quilt, his small face flushed with fever. The boy, 7, clutched a tin mug of broth, his brown eyes heavy with exhaustion, his cough rattling in the quiet. Clara handed Thomas a piece of cornbread, her voice measured. "He needs rest and warmth if that fever's to break," she said. Her rifle still propped by the door, a silent reminder of her guard. Thomas nodded, his rugged features softening with gratitude. "You've given us more'n we deserve, ma'am," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Most would have barred the door." Clara's lips pressed thin, the memory of a drifter's betrayal, a thief who'd stolen her savings still raw. "Don't give me cause to regret it," she replied, her brown eyes narrowing. The fire crackled, its warmth drawing them into a shared silence, the storm's howl a distant roar. Clara fetched a basin of cool water and a linen cloth. Kneeling by Sam to dab his forehead, her movements gentle despite her weariness. Sam stirred, his brown eyes meeting hers, bright with fever but kind. "Thank you, miss," he whispered, his voice small but polite, a smile tugging at his pale lips. Clara's throat tightened, a flicker of warmth piercing the walls around her heart. "Hush now, save your strength," she murmured, tucking the quilt tighter. Thomas watched, his hazel eyes softening, a quiet respect in his posture as he crumbled. Cornbread for Sam, who nibbled weakly. "You're good with him," Thomas said, his voice rough but warm. "Not many care for a stranger's child." Clara stood, brushing flour from her wool skirt, her auburn braid catching the firelight. "Ain't about care," she said, though her tone softened. "No child deserves this cold." She crossed to the pantry, retrieving a jar of wildflower. "Honey, its golden glow like captured sunlight." Stirring a spoonful into warm water, she handed it to Sam, who sipped it gratefully, his cough easing slightly. The cabin's warmth wove a fragile truce, the scent of honey and stew mingling with the pine of the walls. Thomas broke the silence, his gaze on the flames. "We were bound for Billings," he said, unprompted. "My sister's got a place there, a fresh start for us. Didn't reckon on the storm or Sam talkin' ill." Clara studied him, the pocket watch's mystery lingering like a shadow. "That coat don't fit a man down on his luck," she said, her voice probing, testing the edges of his truth. Thomas's hand stilled, his hazel eyes flickering with something guilt, or perhaps a secret he wasn't ready to share. "It was my mother's gift," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Last thing she gave me afore she passed." The answer felt partial, but Sam's cough broke the moment, drawing Clara's attention back to the boy. She adjusted his quilt, her brown eyes softening, the cabin's intimacy softening her guard despite herself. As night deepened, Clara sat by the hearth, her rifle within reach, her gaze drifting between Thomas and Sam. Thomas hummed a soft lullaby, his voice low and soothing, his calloused hands gentle as he brushed Sam's hair from his fevered brow. Clara's heart stirred, wrestling with the drifter's betrayal and the man before her, whose care for his son felt like a truth she could almost trust. The pocket watch, though, whispered of secrets, a puzzle she couldn't ignore. But as Clara rose to stoke the fire, a faint jingle echoed from Thomas's coat. A silver ring, gleaming and intricately carved, rolled across the floorboards, and Clara's breath caught, sensing this stranger's past held more than he'd let on. The blizzard held Elk Ridge, Montana territory in its icy grip, the snow piling high against Clara Wade's log cabin as the wind wailed through the pines. Inside, the hearth's golden flames cast a warm glow, the scent of wood smoke and cornbread, mingling with the faint sweetness of wildflower honey. Clara, 24, knelt by the fire, her auburn braid catching the light, her brown eyes softer now but still wary. The golden pocket watch and silver ring that had fallen from Thomas Reed's coat hinted at secrets, yet the frail cough of his son, Sam, anchored her to compassion. The cabin's timbers creaked under the storm's weight, a fragile sanctuary. In the wilderness of 1890, Thomas, 35, sat by Sam, his dark hair curling at the edges, his hazel eyes fixed on the boy who lay bundled in a quilt, his fevered face pale but calmer. Sam, 7, sipped honeyed water, his brown eyes brightening slightly, his cough less sharp. Clara rose, brushing her wool skirt, and handed Thomas a tin mug of coffee, its steam curling in the air. "He's looking better," she said, her voice cautious, her rifle still by the door. Thomas nodded, his rugged features softening with relief. "Thanks to you," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You've given us a chance most wouldn't." Clara's brown eyes flickered. The drifter's betrayal, a thief who'd stolen her savings, still a shadow over her trust. "Just see he rests," she replied, her tone warmer but guarded. The fire's crackle filled the silence, drawing them into a shared rhythm. Clara fetched a basket of mending, settling by the hearth to darn a torn shirt, her needle flashing in the light. Sam stirred, his brown eyes curious. "You live here all alone, miss?" he asked, his voice small but clear. Clara paused, her needle still. "Since my folks passed," she said, her voice soft. "This cabin's all I got left of them." Sam's smile, gentle and sincere, warmed her heart. "It's real nice," he said. "Smells like my mama's kitchen used to." Thomas's hand tightened on Sam's quilt, his hazel eyes distant, as if the memory stirred a buried pain. Clara's gaze lingered on Thomas, the pocket watch and ring weighing on her thoughts. "You don't talk much of where you're from," she said, her voice probing. Thomas met her eyes, his hazel gaze steady but guarded. "Ain't much to tell," he said. "Lost my wife 3 years back to fever. Been moving since, trying to give Sam something solid." His voice softened, raw with truth, and Clara nodded, her distrust easing. She crossed to the pantry, retrieving a tin of dried apples, and offered Sam a few, his small hands grateful. "My mama made these," she said, her brown eyes warm. "Said they were good for dreamin'." Sam grinned, nibbling the fruit. And Clara's heart stirred, a bond forming with the boy she hadn't expected. As morning broke, the storm showed no mercy, snow cloaking the pines in white, trapping them together. Thomas rose to chop firewood outside, his coat dusted with snow as he swung the axe, his strength evident. Clara watched from the window, her auburn braid swaying, then turned to Sam, dabbing his brow with a cool cloth. "You're tough, ain't you?" she said, her voice gentle. Sam nodded, his brown eyes sparkling. "Pa says I'm his shield." Clara smiled, the cabin's intimacy weaving a thread of trust. Thomas returned, his hazel eyes meeting hers, a quiet gratitude passing between them as he set the wood by the hearth. They ate together, cornbread and stew warming the table, the firelight casting golden shadows. Sam's laughter, soft but growing, filled the room as Clara shared a tale of her father's old mule. Thomas listened, his gaze softening, his calloused hands resting on the table. The pocket watch and ring lingered in Clara's mind, but so did the warmth of Sam's smile and Thomas's steady presence. She wasn't ready to trust fully, but the cabin felt fuller, alive with possibility. But as Clara cleared the table, a faint creak came from the porch, a bootstep, too heavy for the wind, and her heart raced, sensing someone was watching through the storm. The blizzard clung to Elk Ridge, Montana territory in the winter of 1890, its icy breath weaving through the pines, blanketing Clara Wade's log cabin in a shroud of snow. Inside, the hearth's golden flames flickered, casting warmth across the timbers, the scent of cornbread and wood smoke lingering in the air. Clara, 24, stood frozen by the kitchen table, her auburn braid swaying, her brown eyes wide with alarm. The creak of a bootstep on the porch, too deliberate for the wind, had shattered the cabin's fragile peace. Her rifle rested by the door, a silent ally, as she glanced at Thomas Reed and his son, Sam, by the fire. The golden pocket watch and Silver ring from Thomas's coat whispered of secrets, but the unseen watcher outside posed a new, urgent threat. Thomas, 35, rose swiftly, his dark hair catching the firelight, his hazel eyes sharp with instinct. He positioned himself between Sam and the door, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt, his rugged frame tense. Sam, 7, lay bundled in a quilt, his brown eyes heavy with fever but alert, his cough softer now. "Stay quiet, son," Thomas whispered, his voice low and steady. Clara's brown eyes met his, a silent question passing between them. "You expecting trouble?" she asked, her voice hushed but firm, her fingers brushing the rifle's stock. Thomas's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering to the frosted window. "Not here," he said, "but trouble's got a way of following." His words, cryptic yet honest, deepened the mystery of the watch and ring. Clara crept to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered into the storm. The snow fell in thick sheets, obscuring the pines, but a shadow, tall and fleeting, moved near the barn, vanishing into the white. Her heart pounded, the drifter's betrayal a year ago, a thief who'd stolen her savings, flashing through her mind. "Someone's out there," she whispered, gripping the rifle. Thomas nodded, his hazel eyes resolute. "Keep Sam close," he said, his voice a vow. Clara knelt by the boy, her auburn braid brushing his quilt as she tucked him against the hearth. "You're safe, Sam," she murmured, her brown eyes warm despite her fear. Sam's small hand clutched hers, his trust a weight she hadn't expected. The storm's howl masked any further sounds, but Clara's senses were sharp. She and Thomas worked in quiet tandem, bolting the shutters, banking the fire to dim its glow. The cabin grew darker, the air thick with tension, the scent of pine and honey lingering like a fading comfort. Clara's brown eyes darted to Thomas, noting his steady hands, his protective stance. "You're no stranger to danger," she said, her voice low, probing. Thomas met her gaze, his hazel eyes shadowed. "Lost my wife to fever, my home to debt," he said, his voice raw. "Learned to keep moving, keep Sam safe. That's all." His words rang true, but the pocket watch and ring suggested a past more complex than debt. As midnight approached, the storm eased slightly, the wind softening to a mournful sigh. Clara and Thomas sat by the hearth, Sam dozing between them, his brown eyes closed, his breathing steadier. Clara offered Thomas a tin of dried apples, their sweetness a small defiance against the night's unease. "You're good to him," Thomas said, his voice soft, his hazel eyes warm. "Sam ain't had a woman's care since his mama." Clara's throat tightened, her brown eyes glistening. "He's easy to care for," she said, her voice trembling with unexpected warmth. The moment hung between them, a fragile bridge of trust, their hands brushing as they passed the tin. They spoke in whispers, Clara sharing tales of her father's trapping days, Thomas recounting Sam's love for whittling. The cabin felt fuller, alive with shared stories, but the bootsteps' echo lingered, a reminder of the shadow outside. Clara's brown eyes drifted to the door, her rifle within reach, her heart torn between the warmth within and the danger. Without, Thomas's care for Sam, his quiet strength softened her guard. But the watch and ring, and now the watcher kept her wary. Morning broke, the snow still falling but lighter, the pines cloaked in white. Clara rose to check the shutters, her auburn braids swaying, her brown eyes scanning the yard. No tracks, no shadows, but the barn door hung ajar, swaying in the wind. Thomas joined her, his hazel eyes narrowed, his knife glinting at his belt. "I'll check it," he said, his voice firm. Clara nodded, her heart racing, sensing the watcher was closer than they knew. But as Thomas stepped toward the barn, a letter sealed with red wax, bearing Clara's name, lay half buried in the snow by the porch, and her breath caught, fearing the past she'd fled was catching up. The Montana Territory's Elk Ridge lay quiet under a softening blizzard, the pines cloaked in snow as dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold. Clara Wade's log cabin stood steadfast, its timbers warmed by the hearth's golden glow, the scent of wood smoke and venison stew lingering like a promise of refuge. Clara, 24, stood on the porch, her auburn braid dusted with frost. Her brown eyes locked on a wax-sealed letter bearing her name half buried in the snow. The bootstep from the night before, the shadow by the barn, and the letter's sudden appearance stirred her fear, echoing the betrayal of a drifter who'd stolen her savings a year ago. Inside, Thomas Reed and his son, Sam, waited, their presence a fragile anchor against the storm's secrets. Thomas, 35, stepped beside her, his dark hair catching the dawn's light, his hazel eyes sharp with resolve, his knife glinting at his belt. "What's it say?" he asked, his voice low and steady, his rugged frame shielding her from the wind. Clara broke the seal, her hands trembling, and read aloud. "Miss Wade, you harbor a man who owes a debt. Surrender him, or your cabin burns." Her brown eyes widened, her heart racing. "Who's after you?" she demanded, turning to Thomas. His jaw tightened, his hazel eyes shadowed with guilt. "His name's Harlan Voss," he admitted, his voice raw. "I worked his ranch, took wages he claimed were stolen. Been running ever since." The golden pocket watch and silver ring, his mother's heirlooms, he'd said now hinted at a deeper truth, perhaps tied to Voss's claim. Sam, 7, peered from the doorway, his brown eyes wide, his fever easing but his small frame frail. "Pa ain't no thief," he said, his voice trembling. Clara's heart softened, her brown eyes meeting his, and she knelt, brushing his hair. "I believe him, Sam," she said, her voice gentle, though doubt lingered. Thomas gripped her shoulder, his touch warm. "I'll face Voss," he said. "You and Sam stay safe." Clara shook her head, her auburn braids swaying. "This is my home," she said, her voice firm. "We face him together." The cabin's warmth built through shared meals and stories bound them now, a family forged in the storm. As noon approached, the blizzard eased, sunlight glinting off the snow. Clara and Thomas fortified the cabin, bolting shutters, loading the rifle. Sam sat by the hearth, nibbling dried apples, his brown eyes trusting. Clara's brown eyes met Thomas's, a spark of something deeper love, perhaps igniting in their shared resolve. The air grew still, the pines silent, until a figure emerged from the trees. Harlan Voss, tall and grizzled, his gray eyes cold, a revolver at his hip. "Reed," he bellowed, "you owe me." Thomas stepped onto the porch, his hazel eyes steady. "I earned those wages, Voss," he said. "The watch, the ring, they're my family's, not yours." Clara stood beside him, rifle raised, her brown eyes fierce. "Leave my land," she said, her voice cutting through the cold. Voss sneered, his hand twitching, but a shout broke the tension. Sheriff Tate, riding up with 2 deputies drawn by rumors of Voss's threats. "Drop it, Harlan," Tate ordered. Voss hesitated, then lowered his gun, his gray eyes burning as the deputies bound him. Thomas exhaled, his hazel eyes meeting Clara's, gratitude and relief softening his rugged features. "You didn't have to stand with me," he said. Clara smiled, her brown eyes warm. "I did," she said, her voice soft but sure. Spring came to Elk Ridge, the pines green under a clear sky. Clara and Thomas married in the meadow, Sam scattering wildflowers, his brown eyes bright with joy. The cabin, once a lonely refuge, became their home, its hearth alive with laughter. Thomas's watch and ring, now openly worn, symbolized a past reclaimed, a future built on trust. In 1890s Montana, women like Clara faced isolation and hardship, their courage and compassion shaping frontier communities. Cabins were more than homes, they were beacons of hope, where strangers became family. If this tale of love and trust warmed your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more Wild West stories. Comment below, would you open your door? Like Clara? Let's keep the frontier alive. But as they watched the sunset, a new rider approached, bearing news of Voss's escape, and Clara sensed their peace might face one final test.